Mrs. Chen, your foundation's quarterly report needs your signature before Monday's board meeting. I looked up from the stack of grant applications covering my office desk, accepting the leather portfolio from my assistant David. The Chen Foundation had processed over 200 funding requests this month alone. Everything from pediatric cancer research to arts education programs. Each application represented someone's hope for positive change, and I took that responsibility seriously. Thank you, David. Any urgent items that can't wait until after the weekend? He consulted his tablet, scrolling through the carefully organized schedule that kept my philanthropic work running smoothly. The Children's Hospital called about the new wing groundbreaking ceremony. They want to confirm your availability for the dedication speech next month. I signed the quarterly report, noting the foundation's assets had grown another 12% this quarter. Conservative investments and strategic partnerships had built our endowment from my initial $20 million commitment into something approaching $200 million over the past 8 years. Not bad for someone who'd started with a business degree and determination to make generational wealth mean something beyond luxury purchases. Confirm the dedication. What else? Your mother-in-law called twice about tonight's gala seating arrangements. Something about ensuring proper family representation at the head table. I suppressed a smile. Eleanor Whitman had been micromanaging family appearances since I'd married her son 5 years ago, treating every social event like a strategic military operation. Tonight's Children's Medical Foundation Gala would be no exception, especially since the Whitman family had been prominent supporters for decades. Did she mention anything specific about the arrangements? David's diplomatically neutral expression told me everything. She expressed concern about maintaining appropriate family hierarchy during the speeches. Translation: Eleanor didn't want me sitting too close to the donors who actually mattered. Despite my foundation's significant contributions to various causes, she still saw me as the outsider who'd somehow captured her son's attention without bringing sufficient social pedigree to the marriage. I'll handle it tonight. Anything else requiring immediate attention? The Detroit Project site visit is confirmed for Tuesday, and the Education Initiative presentations are ready for your review. I nodded, gathering the grant applications I'd been reviewing. The Chen Foundation's Education Initiative was my personal passion project, providing scholarships and program funding to underserved communities. This year's budget allocated $40 million specifically for educational equity programs, money that would change hundreds of lives. My phone buzzed with a text from my husband, James. Mom's already at the venue directing setup. Fair warning, she's in full general mode tonight. I replied, understood. See you at 7. James had learned to navigate his mother's social control tendencies by providing advance warnings and strategic absences. He genuinely loved both of us, but had long ago stopped trying to broker peace between Eleanor's traditional expectations and my decidedly non-traditional approach to wealth and influence. The drive to the Meridian Hotel took 30 minutes through downtown traffic, giving me time to review my mental notes about tonight's event. The Children's Medical Foundation raised money for pediatric research and treatment programs, a cause close to my heart since my younger brother's successful leukemia treatment 15 years ago. The foundation's annual gala typically brought in around $3 million, funding that supported groundbreaking research initiatives. I'd been quietly supporting their work for years through both personal donations and foundation grants, but always in ways that didn't draw attention to the amounts involved. Eleanor Whitman thrived on public recognition and carefully orchestrated social positioning. I preferred results over recognition, a philosophical difference that had created tension from the beginning of my relationship with James. The hotel's valet service handled my car efficiently, and I entered the ballroom to find the expected scene of controlled elegance. crystal chandeliers, perfectly arranged floral centerpieces, round tables seating 10, with a raised platform for the evening speakers and award presentations. The guest list included the city's most prominent philanthropists, medical professionals, and society figures, all dressed in variations of expensive formal wear. Eleanor stood near the registration table, wearing an elegant navy gown and what I'd learned to recognize as her event management expression. She was discussing something with the foundation's executive director, gesturing toward the seating chart with practiced authority. "Isabella, darling," she called when she spotted me. The term darling from Eleanor always carried subtle condescension, as if she were addressing a child who needed gentle correction. "I was just ensuring your seating placement respects the foundation's donor hierarchy." I approached with a warm smile, having learned that genuine pleasantness confused Eleanor more than defensive responses. "Good evening, Eleanor. The decorations look beautiful. I'm sure tonight will be very successful." "Yes. Well, success requires proper planning and appropriate recognition of long-standing supporters." She consulted her seating chart, making small marks with a gold pen. "I've placed you at table 12 with some lovely young couples. I thought you'd be more comfortable with people closer to your own social level." Table 12 was near the back of the room, strategically positioned to be barely visible from the main platform. Eleanor had effectively relegated me to the children's table, despite my foundation's substantial ongoing support for the organization. "That sounds perfect," I said calmly. "I'm sure I'll enjoy the conversation." James appeared beside me, handsome in his black tuxedo and clearly prepared to run interference if necessary. "Mom, Isabella, you both look wonderful. How are the final preparations going?" "Smoothly, thanks to proper advance planning," Eleanor replied, shooting me a meaningful look. "Though some people seem to think charitable work is just about writing checks, rather than understanding the social dynamics involved." The barb was subtle but clear. Eleanor believed I lacked sophistication in my approach to philanthropy, preferring direct action over the elaborate social rituals that sustained her peer group's charitable efforts. "Speaking of checks," James said carefully, "Isabella's foundation has been incredibly generous to pediatric research programs. I saw the quarterly reports, and the funding amounts are really impressive." Eleanor's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. She knew about my foundation, but had never inquired about specifics, preferring to assume it was a small-scale vanity project rather than acknowledge its actual scope and impact. "Of course, dear. New money often tries to make up for lack of heritage through excessive generosity." The comment landed like a slap, though delivered with Eleanor's trademark gracious tone. She just dismissed my family's hard-earned success as new money, while simultaneously criticizing the generosity that had helped fund medical breakthroughs saving children's lives. James tensed beside me, but I maintained my calm expression. "You're absolutely right, Eleanor. Heritage is important, though I find that combining traditional values with contemporary resources often produces the most meaningful results." Before she could respond, the foundation's executive director approached our group with obvious relief at finding Eleanor available for consultation. "Mrs. Whitman, we need your guidance on the auction presentation order. Should we lead with the research equipment or the scholarship fund?" Eleanor immediately turned her attention to event logistics, leaving James and me to find our assigned seats. As we walked through the ballroom, I noticed the careful social geography Eleanor had orchestrated. The head table featured longtime board members and major donors whose families had been supporting the foundation for generations. Tables 2 through 6 held prominent physicians, pharmaceutical executives, and established society figures. My table 12 was populated by younger professionals who probably donated in the hundreds rather than thousands. "I'm sorry about Mom," James said quietly as we reached our table. "She's been stressed about tonight's fundraising goals." "It's fine. I understand the pressure of event management." What I understood was that Eleanor saw me as a threat to her carefully maintained social hierarchy. My foundation's resources exceeded those of most families at the head table, but I'd never demanded recognition or board positions in return for support. That restraint had apparently been interpreted as evidence that my contributions weren't significant enough to warrant serious consideration. Our tablemates were indeed pleasant young professionals. Two couples who worked in medical administration, a pediatric nurse and her husband, and a pharmaceutical researcher with his wife. The conversation flowed easily through topics ranging from treatment innovations to fundraising challenges, with everyone sharing genuine passion for improving children's health care. During the salad course, I noticed Eleanor moving between tables, greeting longtime supporters with warm familiarity while maintaining polite distance from those she considered less established. Her performance was flawless, demonstrating the social skills that had made her a formidable force in philanthropic circles for 30 years. The auction began after dinner, featuring experiences and items donated by local businesses and wealthy supporters. Art pieces, vacation packages, dining experiences, and medical equipment all commanded impressive bids from the assembled guests. Eleanor served as one of the volunteer auctioneers, her practiced charm encouraging competitive bidding that pushed prices well above estimated values. As the auction concluded and the evening speakers approached the podium, Eleanor made her way to my table. She'd consumed at least 3 glasses of wine during dinner, and her usual careful control had relaxed into something approaching honesty. "Isabella, could I speak with you privately?" she asked, though her tone suggested it wasn't really a request. I followed her to a quiet alcove near the hotel bar, away from the main ballroom activity. The space was dimly lit and relatively secluded, perfect for the kind of direct conversation Eleanor had been avoiding for 5 years. "I think it's time we discussed your role in this family," she began, her voice low but intense. "James is a wonderful man from a respected family with deep roots in this community. His future requires careful consideration of social positioning and appropriate partnerships." I remained silent, allowing her to continue. "You seem like a nice enough person, but you'll never fit into this family or our social circle. Your background, your approach to charity, your complete lack of understanding about how these relationships actually work." She gestured toward the ballroom. "Tonight is a perfect example. You sit quietly at the back, contributing nothing to the conversation, while people who've built real influence over decades handle the important work." The words hung in the air between us, years of carefully suppressed disapproval finally spoken aloud. "I appreciate your honesty, Eleanor," I said calmly. "If you'll excuse me for a moment, I need to make a phone call." I walked to the hotel lobby, pulling out my phone to call David. He answered immediately, despite the late hour. "Mrs. Chen, how can I help?" "I need you to process an immediate donation to the Children's Medical Foundation. $5 million from the foundation's discretionary fund. Have the paperwork ready for electronic signature within the next 10 minutes. Certainly, any specific designation for the funding. General operating support. And David, please call the foundation's executive director directly to confirm the donation tonight. I believe they're hoping to announce a funding milestone during the evening's program." "Understood. Anything else?" "That should be sufficient." I returned to the ballroom as the foundation's executive director was approaching the microphone for his closing remarks. Eleanor had resumed her position at the head table, looking satisfied with whatever she believed she'd accomplished during our conversation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the executive director began, "tonight has been an extraordinary success, with auction proceeds exceeding our projected goals by nearly 40%. Polite applause filled the room. But before we conclude, I've just received notification of an additional contribution that brings tonight's total to unprecedented levels." He paused, consulting the note David had apparently delivered. "I'm honored to announce a $5 million donation from the Chin Foundation, designated for our general operating support." The applause was no longer polite. It was thunderous, sustained, and accompanied by surprised murmurs as people processed the significance of the announcement. $5 million was more than many of the Foundation's previous annual totals. I remained seated at table 12, maintaining the same calm expression I'd worn all evening. But around me, the social dynamics Eleanor had carefully orchestrated were crumbling in real time. The Foundation's board president approached the microphone next, clearly struggling to manage his excitement. "The Chin Foundation's extraordinary generosity represents a transformational moment for our organization. Mrs. Chen, would you please join us on stage to accept our deepest gratitude?" Every head in the ballroom turned toward my table. The pediatric nurse beside me gasped softly. The pharmaceutical researcher was staring with obvious shock. From the head table, I could see Eleanor's face, cycling through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as she realized the implications. I stood slowly, smoothing my dress, and walked through the suddenly silent ballroom toward the stage. The same walk Eleanor had dismissed as insignificant now carried very different weight as 300 prominent citizens processed the revelation that the quiet woman relegated to the back table had just made the largest single donation in the Foundation's history. On stage, the executive director shook my hand warmly while the board president presented me with a crystal award that clearly hadn't been prepared in advance. The applause continued as photographers captured the moment for the Foundation's promotional materials. "Mrs. Chen," the executive director said into the microphone, "would you like to say a few words about the Chen Foundation's commitment to pediatric healthcare?" I accepted the microphone, looking out over the crowd that was now paying very close attention to every word. "Thank you for this recognition, though I want to emphasize that tonight's donation represents the collective work of our Foundation's entire team. The Chen Foundation was established to address critical gaps in healthcare access and research funding, particularly for underserved populations." I paused, noticing Eleanor's increasingly pale complexion. "Over the past 8 years, we've allocated over $40 million specifically to pediatric research and treatment programs. Tonight's contribution continues that commitment, funding innovative research that will save children's lives for generations to come." The numbers were having their intended effect. $40 million plus tonight's $5 million represented more philanthropic impact than most of the families in attendance had achieved over decades of carefully managed social giving. The Foundation's education initiative has also provided scholarships to over 300 medical students from underrepresented communities, ensuring that the next generation of physicians reflects the diversity of patients they'll serve. I handed the microphone back to the executive director, accepted final congratulations from the board members, and returned to my table through sustained applause. The walk back revealed a completely transformed social landscape. People who'd ignored me all evening now watched with newfound respect. Conversations paused as I passed, with obvious recalculation of social hierarchies occurring in real time. James met me halfway, his expression showing pride, mixed with amazement. He'd known about my Foundation's work, but hadn't fully understood the scale of impact until tonight's public revelation. Isabella, that was incredible. I had no idea about the $40 million in previous funding. Your mother and I had a conversation about family contributions. I thought it might be helpful to clarify the Chen Foundation's level of engagement. As we reached our table, Eleanor appeared beside us, her earlier confidence replaced by barely controlled distress. The carefully orchestrated social evening had become a public demonstration of her complete misunderstanding of family dynamics. Isabella, she said quietly, I think we need to continue our conversation. Of course. Though perhaps James should join us this time. We found a quiet corner where Eleanor could speak without being overheard by the guests who were now eyeing our family group with obvious curiosity. I owe you an apology, Eleanor began, her voice strained. I clearly misunderstood the scope of your charitable work. You misunderstood several things, Eleanor, but the charitable work was probably the least important. James looked between us, sensing undercurrents he hadn't witnessed directly. What exactly did you misunderstand, Mom? Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. I suggested that Isabella didn't fit into our family or social circle, that her contributions weren't significant enough to warrant serious consideration. You said, I'd never be good enough for this family. I corrected gently. Those were your exact words. James's expression shifted from confusion to anger as he processed the implications. Mom, what were you thinking? I was thinking about family heritage and social positioning. I didn't realize that Isabella's foundation had achieved such substantial impact. This isn't about money, Eleanor, I said quietly. This is about respect, about treating family members with basic courtesy, regardless of their perceived social status. You're absolutely right. I've been unfair. The admission clearly cost her significant effort, but the evening's revelations had shattered her confidence in her own judgment. Over the following weeks, Eleanor's attitude underwent a dramatic transformation. She began asking informed questions about the Chen Foundation's work, attending board meetings as an observer, and introducing me to her social circle as my daughter-in-law who runs one of the city's most impactful philanthropic organizations. The shift was comprehensive and permanent. Within 3 months, she'd recommended me for positions on 2 hospital boards and a university foundation committee. Her friends, who'd previously treated me with polite dismissiveness, now sought my advice on their own charitable initiatives. But the most significant change was personal. Eleanor began treating me as an intellectual equal rather than a social project requiring correction. Our conversations moved from superficial pleasantries to substantive discussions about healthcare policy, education reform, and strategic philanthropy. 6 months after the gala, Eleanor and I were reviewing grant applications together in my foundation office, collaborating on a new initiative to fund medical research at the Children's Hospital. I had been thinking about that night, she said, setting down a scholarship application, about how wrong I was about everything. You weren't wrong about everything, just about some important assumptions. I assumed that generosity required recognition, that impact required social positioning, that family status could be measured by how closely someone conformed to established patterns. I looked up from the research proposal I'd been reviewing, and now I realized that real influence comes from actual results, not social performance. That my daughter-in-law has accomplished more meaningful change in 8 years than I managed in 30. We've accomplished different things, Eleanor. Your social connections have opened doors that made our collaboration possible. Perhaps. But I spent decades focused on maintaining position while you built something that actually improves lives. The relationship between Eleanor and me had evolved into genuine partnership, built on mutual respect rather than social obligation. James often commented that family dinners had become more interesting once his mother and wife started sharing ideas instead of navigating carefully around unspoken tensions. A year after the charity gala, Eleanor approached me with a proposal that would have seemed impossible during our first difficult conversation. "I'd like to establish a legacy fund," she said over coffee in my office. "Something that combines the Whitman family's long-term community connections with the Chen Foundation's strategic approach to philanthropy." "What kind of focus did you have in mind?" "Healthcare access for underserved populations. I've been learning about treatment disparities, and I think our combined resources could address some critical gaps." We spent the next 3 months developing the Whitman Chin Health Equity Initiative, a $10 million fund that would provide both direct patient support and systemic healthcare improvements. Eleanor's social network provided political connections and community access, while my foundation's infrastructure handled program management and impact measurement. The initiative's launch event drew over 500 attendees, including elected officials, medical leaders, and philanthropic organizations from across the region. Eleanor's introductory speech highlighted the importance of combining traditional community engagement with innovative funding strategies. When she introduced me as her partner in developing the initiative, the applause was genuine rather than obligatory. The woman who'd once dismissed me as socially inadequate now presented me as an essential collaborator in addressing community challenges. "Mrs. Chen brings both strategic vision and operational excellence to this initiative," Eleanor told the audience. "Her foundation's track record demonstrates that philanthropic resources can create lasting change when managed with proper accountability and community focus." Later that evening, as we watched guests mingle and discuss potential collaborations, Eleanor reflected on the transformation our relationship had undergone. "You know, I spent so many years protecting what I thought was important that I nearly missed recognizing what actually mattered." Which was, that family isn't about maintaining traditions or social positions. It's about supporting each other's efforts to contribute something meaningful to the world. I smiled, thinking about the journey we traveled from that first hostile conversation to our current partnership. Sometimes the best outcomes come from the most unexpected beginnings. Indeed. Though I still think you should have told me sooner about the foundation's scope. We could have been collaborating years earlier. I tried several times, but you weren't ready to hear it then. And now you ask questions instead of making assumptions. That makes all the difference. The Whitman Chin Health Equity Initiative has since expanded into a $50 million program that serves as a model for other communities. Eleanor and I co-chair the board, combining her decades of nonprofit governance experience with my strategic philanthropy background. But more importantly, we've built a relationship based on genuine respect and shared commitment to creating positive change. The mother-in-law, who once told me I'd never fit into her family, now introduces me as her most valued collaborator in making that family's legacy more meaningful than either of us could have achieved alone. Success isn't just about having resources. It's about using those resources in ways that create lasting positive impact and building relationships strong enough to multiply that impact over time. Sometimes that means making dramatic gestures at charity galas. More often, it means patiently demonstrating your values until others are ready to recognize and respect them.